What do we do now? Snowcrystal whispered, looking hopefully at Stormblade and Spark. We fight, of course, the Jolteon growled, glaring from one ghost Pokemon to another. We can't fight them all, argued Stormblade, but I think I have an idea. As he and Snowcrystal backed up toward a group of rocks, the Scyther whispered something to Spark. The Jolteon nodded and fired off a large blast of electricity, not large enough to hit all the ghost Pokemon, but enough to create quite a lot of light. Now, run! Stormblade yelled and nudged Snowcrystal, who was practically blinded by the electric blast illuminating the dark area. The growlithe stood up and ran, unwittingly in the opposite direction of where Spark had just bolted. Instead of following the others, she was heading further into the maze of jagged rocks. Snowcrystal let out a cry of terror as more strange Pokemon appeared out of thin air around her, all of them ghost types. Shaking with fear, she glanced around for Spark, but the Jolteon was nowhere to be seen. She could see clearly again, but obviously Spark's attack hadn't stopped the ghost Pokemon for long. Before she could try to fire an Ember attack, a shadow punch from one of the enemy Pokemon sent her skidding across the dusty ground. Feeling her back hit one of the rocks roughly, Snowcrystal struggled to stand. A moment later, as several varying attacks hit it at once, she could feel the rock shake from the impact. Knowing she stood no chance in a fight, Snowcrystal took off, hoping it would be harder for the ghost types to hit her as she dodged between the rocks. However, she quickly discovered that their attacks could move through them, and she found herself running madly through a maze of jagged brownstone. Glancing left and right, Snowcrystal tried to find a way out, realizing that although her kind were naturally fast, ghost Pokemon were everywhere, appearing around every corner. They were going to trap her if she didn't make it out in the open soon. A Shadow Ball attack out of nowhere sent her crashing to the ground. Her crystal amulet was sent flying from her and landed a few meters away, glowing softly. As Snowcrystal struggled to stand up, a green blur darted in front of her. Quickly realizing it was Stormblade, she managed to get to her feet. The Scyther pointed with his blade to the left, indicating where she should run. Snowcrystal took off just as Stormblade struck a Haunter with Night Slash. She had only gone a few paces when she suddenly turned back, remembering the crystal that had been left lying near one of the big rocks. Snowcrystal raced towards the amulet and quickly snapped it up in her jaws before running in the direction the Scyther had indicated. It wasn't long before she had cleared the rocks and was out in the open. Stopping to try and locate the others, she realized that the ghost Pokemon weren't following her. Some of them glared at her eerily from the rocks, but they did not venture beyond. Snowcrystal shivered as she carefully slipped the amulet back over her neck. A moment later, she heard approaching paw steps and turned to see Spark limping toward her. "What's the matter? Are you hurt?" Snowcrystal asked, worried. The Jolteon's front leg didn't look too badly damaged, but it did seem to slow him down. "It's not bad," Spark muttered, shrugging as he sat beside Snowcrystal. "A bunch of those ghosts tried using these weird attacks on me, and one of them hurt my leg a bit. But it's nothing serious." Snowcrystal was glad that Spark seemed less hostile, but she still had no idea if Stormblade was all right. However, she didn't have to worry for long, for the Scyther soon flew from the direction of the rocks and landed beside them. He cast a worried look back at the hostile Pokemon, and Spark assured him that they didn't seem to want to venture past the rock. Snowcrystal glanced fearfully at the ghost types who were still watching them, and remembered how Stormblade had tried to fight them. "Are you all right?" she asked him, not sure whether or not he'd been injured in the battle. "Yes," answered Stormblade. "I'm not hurt. It seemed like those attacks were more for the purpose of scaring us away than actually injuring us." "I beg to differ," Spark muttered darkly, starting to lick his injured leg. "It could have been a lot worse," Stormblade replied. "With their numbers, they could have killed us, but they didn't. Though why they're guarding those rocks, I have no idea." Snowcrystal sighed. "Well, let's get going. We're going to have to make it to the forest soon." "Don't worry. It's not as far away as it looks." "We should make it by tomorrow," Stormblade told her. "But remember, the forest isn't safe. We'll have to be careful." Snowcrystal nodded and the three headed off, sleep forgotten, as one by one the ghost Pokemon disappeared into thin air. Blazefang now led a group of about 20 Houndour, not including himself, Boneclaw, and Wildflame. The somewhat small and inexperienced Houndour now felt important and entirely in charge of the group who'd been chosen to seek out Articuno and follow Snowcrystal. It had been fairly easy for the newly formed pack to follow the Growlithe's tracks, and being fire types, the lack of water was not overly worrying. All the same, Blazefang was eager to reach the forest up ahead, where finding food and water would be far easier. Though they had traveled much through the night, the nocturnal Pokemon were getting tired, and at last Blazefang decided to let them rest a bit. "All right, everyone, let's stop for a while. Try and get some sleep." Blazefang called to the others. "Boneclaw, Wildflame, and I will be lookouts." One Houndour gestured with his head toward a large group of rocks in the distance. "Why don't we rest over there?" he asked, "instead of just lying out here in the open?" Blazefang rolled his eyes. "'Cause me and these two will be able to spot any danger over a long distance from here," the leader muttered. "How could we do that if we stopped by all those big rocks, huh? And don't you think some other Pokemon, some unfriendly Pokemon, might be thinking the same thing? To take shelter by the rocks? And what if they found us sheltering there? What then, eh?" The Houndour who'd made the suggestion fell silent, turning away from his leader as he curled up on a patch of dusty ground. "Right," growled Blazefang. "I'm the leader here, and I give the orders. All right." The other Houndour mumbled something inaudibly. "What was that?" inquired Blazefang. "Speak up." "All right," the Houndour replied reluctantly, and Blazefang smiled, nodding in reply. "That's right." By the time the first rays of sun began to shine on the distant horizon, the forest appeared to be much closer to the three travelers. "Well, at least we're getting somewhere," Snowcrystal remarked to Stormblade as she studied the group of trees ahead. The Scyther nodded and the two walked on, Spark following at a short distance. However, the Jolteon was limping a lot less, and Snowcrystal was relieved that the injury really hadn't been serious. The group had no trouble from wild Pokemon, spotting only a Sandslash or a Cacnea here and there. These Pokemon neither approached nor threatened them, and the travelers left them alone. Now that it wasn't so dark, the going was much quicker, and Snowcrystal could almost forget the ghost Pokemon attack at the rocks in her excitement to continue the journey. It wasn't much longer before the three travelers came upon the outer fringes of the forest. Spark even came across a small stream near the first group of trees, allowing them to take a drink and rest briefly before carrying on. As they began to make their way through the winding paths of the forest, with Stormblade in the lead, Snowcrystal began to notice a few things. First of all, she now realized that Spark had been right. There were no signs of any other Pokemon, no natural forest noise, no scurrying Rattata in the undergrowth, no chattering of Citrits in the trees, no birdsong, nothing. Second of all, the further they traveled, the darker the forest became, even though it was daytime. The interlocking branches of the trees overhead made her feel as if she was in a cave. They hadn't been traveling long when Spark spotted a group of berry bushes up ahead. Though it wasn't as good as freshly caught prey, Snowcrystal thought the berries tasted delicious. Though, she figured it was probably just because she was so hungry. Strangely, Stormblade had been completely quiet since entering the forest, except for the occasional brief warning about some low-hanging branch or tree root she or Spark were about to run into. Even now, he stood a little ways away from the others, not moving or glancing in their direction. He had not eaten anything, despite the vast amount of berries that grew plentiful in the area. This struck Snowcrystal as extremely odd, considering he couldn't have found much to eat in the wasteland, but she didn't question him. After Snowcrystal and Spark had eaten their fill, the group carried on. After a while of wandering through semi-darkness, Spark whispered to Stormblade, "We sure aren't getting anywhere quickly. Why don't you fly over the trees and see how much further we have to go before we're out of here?" Stormblade seemed a bit surprised, as if he was wondering why he hadn't thought of that. "Oh, right. Good idea," he muttered before taking off. "Why didn't he try that before, if he was so worried about this place?" Snowcrystal asked, giving Spark a puzzled look. Spark shrugged. "I guess he's just too paranoid about all the traps we saw earlier. Didn't want to leave us alone, perhaps. I don't see what the big deal is. After all, he can fly. And see well in the dark. He'd spot a trap before any of us ran into it." "Do you think he knows something about this place that we don't?" Snowcrystal mused, pawing at her crystal amulet. "If he did, he would have told us. That much I know," Spark replied. The two sat in silence for a while until Stormblade returned. "This way," he mumbled quietly, and the others followed. Stormblade led them through more winding paths, deeper and deeper into the darkening forest, increasing his pace until Spark and Snowcrystal had to sprint to keep up with him. "Hey, Stormblade, wait up, will ya?" called Spark from behind. And as if in answer, Stormblade stopped dead. At first, Snowcrystal thought it was Spark's shout that had made him stop, and then she heard a faint sound that gradually increased until she could make out the pounding of hoofbeats. Snowcrystal was about to ask Stormblade what he thought it was, when dozens of dark shapes suddenly bolted past them beyond the trees to their left. Stormblade ducked down, and Snowcrystal did likewise, peering at the Pokemon as they thundered by. They were large Pokemon with long, slender legs and strange antlers on their heads. Snowcrystal suddenly recognized what they were, even through the gloom. Stantler. Stantler herds would often pass through her territory, and though they were good prey, she had never hunted one. It took an entire pack of growlithe to bring one down, and only the most experienced of hunters even tried. Now, Snowcrystal was only concerned with watching them, and as the last of the Stantler vanished, Spark whispered in a confused voice, "That's odd. Me and Stormblade didn't see any other Pokemon when we passed through here the first time." "Well, it's a big forest," Snowcrystal replied, standing up straight again. "And from what you've told me, Pokemon probably just want to stay away from that human place." "Ah, well," sighed Spark. "It doesn't matter. Besides, they're only Stantler. I mean..." He immediately quieted as one of the deer-like Pokemon emerged from a nearby bush, acting like it was completely unaware of them. Snowcrystal took a step toward it, and its head swerved towards her. The look in the Stantler's eyes seemed to freeze her to the spot, but she found herself staring not at the Pokemon's head, but its antlers, which had seemed to glow faintly. Snowcrystal stiffened as the forest grew darker and the trees closed in all around her. All at once, the place had become scarier, and all the trees seemed to tower over her even more. Then the thundering rumble of hoofbeats came again. Shaking her head to clear her vision, Snowcrystal shouted, "They're headed this way!" The Stantler who stood in front of Snowcrystal suddenly charged past the group, leaping over a few bushes and vanishing into the darkness. Then, from the bushes ahead, the rest of the herd came charging towards them. Spark glanced at the Stantler briefly before darting to the side and heading for the nearest cover. Snowcrystal realized that the herd wasn't going to move out of their way. In fact, it looked as if the Stantler wanted to trample them flat. She started to sprint toward the shelter of some nearby bushes as Stormblade spread his wings and flew out of the path of the stampede. Snowcrystal was beginning to realize that perhaps the Scyther had been right to be worried. Just as she was out of the herd's way, a group of Stantlers suddenly swerved towards her, lowering their horns as their hooves pounded closer and closer. Snowcrystal tried to move faster, but quickly found herself tangled in a bush's thorny branches. There was no time to run. She closed her eyes. And nothing happened. The Growlithe slowly opened her eyes, seeing Stantler running past her on either side. Their horns still lowered. However, those in the center were running right through her, as if they were ghosts. Confused, she glanced around. Seeing Spark crouched down near some bushes, his eyes shut tight. Snowcrystal managed to untangle herself from the bush and slowly crept over and nudged him. "Spark!" The Jolteon's eyes were still closed. "What's going on? I can still hear them!" Snowcrystal nudged him again, and Spark backed away in shock as he opened his eyes and glanced around. "What the... They're running straight through the trees!" the Jolteon whispered, glancing around in confusion. "Wait a minute," Snowcrystal mused. "I remember something Icefang, that's our Growlithe tribe's leader, said about Stantler. Even just one of them can sometimes create the illusion of a whole herd, or at least, that's what he said. I only just remembered it, and I wouldn't have believed it until now." "But why would a Stantler do that to us?" Stormblade asked, still seeming a bit shocked as he watched the very real-looking Stantler herd running straight through the trees and rocks. "We're predators," Snowcrystal answered. "I guess it felt threatened. Though, there's no way I could have attacked that Stantler. I can barely use fire attacks as it is. Or any other attacks for that matter," she added with a hint of embarrassment. After a few moments, the last of the Stantler illusion faded, and Snowcrystal could see things clearly again. The forest was back to looking normal. Spark and Snowcrystal walked over towards Stormblade, who emerged from behind a couple trees. "Stormblade, it was an illusion," Snowcrystal began. "There really weren't that many—" "I know. I saw them. But wait. Listen," Stormblade whispered, peering into the bushes. Snowcrystal was about to reply when she heard a faint cry sounding from somewhere nearby. Stormblade headed toward the noise, with Spark and Snowcrystal following closely behind. The three of them emerged into a small clearing. Snowcrystal could scent another fire type, as well as the fainter scent of something strange. Something that wasn't Pokemon. As she gazed further into the gloom, she realized that lying in the center of the clearing was a small, caged Vulpix.